Maggie Alderson grew up in London and studied art history before covering the world of international fashion for decades, for newspapers in Britain as well as in Australia. Her columns these days usually describe a photograph of a celebrity, pointing out what's particularly stylish about that person, not in the high fashion stakes, but in a way anyone could make use of. Apart from fashion, she also writes novels about life and women. Her latest book, Everything Changes But You, tells the story of three women, each looking for a place to call home. Maggie Alderson, welcome to 1+1.
Thank you, it's great to be here.
Why were you interested in fashion? What was your first job in fashion?
I wanted to work on magazines from a very young age. My maternal grandmother was a bespoke dressmaker in the 1920s and 30s, so I grew up in a house full of fabric and trimmings and button boxes and patterns, and just was always fascinated by it and would talk to her about it. And my mum always had a lot of fashion magazines, so she would always go to like Bieber and all the the new shops. She was very across it. So Bieber had a very big effect on me as a little girl. I would sit there under one of the hat stands covered in feather boas, eyes on stalks, watching all these glamorous young women.
So you never thought about actually being a designer yourself?
No, I didn't. I was always, even as a child, I had this little book, a Ladybird book, of the history of costume, it was called. And I used to go into the dressing up box, and I did every era, from medieval up to, I think it went up to the 1920s, and I would create the look from whatever we had. So I was fascinated by the history of fashion, the context of it, from a very young age.
And what about your link to Australia? When did you first come here? I
came in 1993. I was going through a really horrible time in my life, just everything came at once. I had, I hate saying I had cancer, it sounds like I was really, really sick, but I had sort of beginnings of cancer. It was horrible, and I had to have vial operations and radiotherapy, and I lost my job, my marriage was breaking up. It was just an absolute cluster bomb of yuck was happening at once. And I'd met Kathy Lett shortly after she'd moved to London, and we completely bonded. And Kathy came to see me in the Royal Marsden Hospital, and she said, right, you've got to go to Australia. That's your cure. And so I did. I got some freelance and came out for 6 weeks and was offered a job while I was here, and I took it.
You write columns, well, more recently anyway, some of the things that you do is writing columns on a theme of fashion and style. There's a perception that all celebrities are stylish. In your view, is style something people are born with?
Some people are, yeah. No, some people you just see on the street, and they've put the collar up, or they've pushed up a sleeve. It just seems to be an innate thing, and it's nothing to do with money or having a personal stylist. Some people are just born with it. I think you can learn it to an extent. And one of the things I used to love when I was a magazine editor, especially when I was on British Elle, which was really high fashion, and a young girl would start, and you'd see her on day one, and she'd be, quite awkwardly dressed. And then over the months, you'd just watch her mutate into this amazing creature, this sort of level of sophistication that she would learn. And I used to love watching that process.
You also covered a lot of the major fashion shows in Paris, Milan, and London. What was the attraction of being part of that I suppose, small crowd that got to see the very best and the first?
Greatest show on earth.
How so?
The audience. And it's very interesting to me now that there are all these blogs about the audience. And when I started out, Anna Wintour, you only knew that name if you were in the magazine industry, whereas now she's a household name. And more of the editors and the stylists are becoming celebrities in their own right. But I used to go to the shows. I went to my first one in 1983, first London Fashion Week, and right from the start, while I loved seeing what was on the runway, it was the audience that fascinated me.
In terms of the eras of fashion, a lot of people tend to look back 60s, 70s, 80s and say they were great eras of fashion compared to now. Do you concur with that?
No. I think fashion is amazing now. What I love about fashion is because there is fashion, but at the same time there isn't fashion. You can wear whatever you like. You can cherry pick the bits that you like of all those decades. And you know, there are always hot trends that you can follow if that's your thing, or more subtly reference them, which is what I prefer to do. Or you can just completely ignore it and still be really well dressed. You can wear vintage. I think fashion is so free now, and it's much more egalitarian, because cheap clothes are amazing now. You know, the smart way to dress at the moment is to mix it all up, and I love that it's completely accessible to wear acceptable vintage. It's the most brilliant. Whoever came out with that term is a genius. It's second-hand clothes. I love that.
The issue of body image has been around for a long time, but magazines and the media are often held as being partially responsible for the largely negative way that a lot of young women view their bodies. You've worked in magazines, obviously. What's your take on that? Do you think magazines should be blamed?
No, it drives me mad. I mean, I have personally been blamed on Radio 4 in the UK of, you know, personally being responsible for anorexia, and when I was editing Elle, because we used slim models, and it's part of the problem. But I think TV and music videos in particular do more damage to young women's unrealistic expectations of how they should look. I hate the very, very thin, well, I don't hate the models, but I hate the culture that some fashion designers use really painfully thin models on the catwalk, and it used to really make me upset. I mean, some people are naturally slim, some people are naturally skinny, but you could tell the girls that were starving themselves, and it used to make me very uncomfortable.
That still hasn't been wiped out, though, has it?
No, it hasn't, and
has the whole issue lost momentum, do you think?
No, I don't think so. I think it is slowly but surely it is beginning to equalise a little bit. But there's a big campaign in the UK at the moment. Erin O'Connor, the supermodel, is involved with it, to try and get designers to use a greater range of body shapes. And it's something that I do with my column. I want to have all different heights, all different sizes, all different shapes, all looking great.
You have a young daughter. How are you going to ensure that she hopefully grows up with a healthy image of her body?
It's a nightmare. I see her looking at herself in the mirror and pulling her stomach in, and it breaks my heart. And I've tried from when she was tiny to try and shield her from it, but you can't. And she's very keen and, you know, getting on the computer and playing on all the fashion doll games, and guess what shape the girls are? It's very, very difficult. I have always, from when she was young, she was never that into Barbie dolls, but sometimes people would give her things, and I would always say, oh, this is PhD Barbie. This is Prime Minister Barbie, and try and instill that in her. I hope it worked. But no, I do catch her looking at herself sideways in the mirror, and it's a bit like a dagger to my heart.
Maggie Alderson, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you for speaking with 1+1.
Thank you.